Imagine for a moment being so deep underwater, so completely submerged in the crushing weight of obligation, that the very idea of sunlight, of fresh air, feels like a distant, impossible dream. This was the silent, suffocating reality for Elias Thorne. Not underwater in a literal sense, but drowning in a tide of debt that threatened to pull him under for good. Every morning, the first sensation wasn't the warmth of his bed, but the cold dread of another day facing the relentless onslaught of bills, the incessant ringing of collection calls, and the gnawing anxiety that clung to him like a second skin. Elias was a man in his late 30s. His once bright eyes now dulled by exhaustion and worry. He worked tirelessly, juggling 3 different part-time jobs, a night shift at a local diner, freelance graphic design during the day, and weekend shifts at a hardware store. His small, one-bedroom apartment, once a cozy sanctuary, had become a monument to his financial struggle. Every piece of furniture, every appliance, a silent reminder of money owed, of dreams deferred. The worn armchair, the perpetually flickering kitchen light, even the faint scent of stale coffee that lingered in the air. It all whispered of a life lived on the brink. He meticulously tracked every penny, every incoming and outgoing amount, in a ledger that grew thicker and more disheartening with each passing week. Student loans from a degree he never truly used, medical bills from an unexpected emergency a few years prior, credit card balances that spiraled out of control when he tried to cover the basics. It was a monstrous web, each thread entangled with the next, tightening around him with every breath he took. He'd cut every imaginable expense. His meals were simple, often repetitive, his social life non-existent. He wore clothes until they frayed, walked instead of taking the bus, and had long ago given up on any semblance of leisure. Hope, once a flickering candle, had been reduced to a wisp of smoke, barely clinging to existence. He felt ashamed, isolated, caught in a cycle he couldn't break, no matter how hard he toiled. Every attempt to climb out seemed to only dig him deeper. He'd tried budgeting apps, side hustles that fizzled out, even considered desperate measures. The feeling of being trapped, of being utterly powerless against this financial leviathan, was a constant companion. A heavy cloak draped over his shoulders, making every movement, every thought, an effort. One unusually quiet Tuesday morning, a morning that felt no different from 1,000 others, Elias sat at his cluttered kitchen table, a lukewarm cup of coffee in hand, staring blankly at a stack of overdue notices. He'd run out of options, run out of ideas, run out of fight. A deep sigh escaped his lips, a weary sound that spoke volumes of his profound despair. He noticed a forgotten cardboard box tucked away in a corner, filled with old college textbooks and faded notebooks he hadn't touched in years. He thought perhaps there might be an old textbook he could sell for a few dollars. A desperate and unlikely hope. With a heavy heart, he pulled the box closer, the dust motes dancing in the weak morning light filtering through the window. He began sifting through the forgotten remnants of a past life. A life where possibilities felt endless before the weight of reality had settled in. Pages turned, memories briefly flickered. A chemistry textbook, a philosophy reader, a literature anthology. Then buried at the very bottom, beneath a pile of loose papers, he found it. A small, unassuming, spiral-bound notebook, its cover faded and peeling. A forgotten relic from an obscure elective he'd taken in his freshman year. The art of miniature craftsmanship. He barely remembered enrolling in it, let alone attending. Curiosity, a rare visitor these days, pricked at him. He opened it to a random page, half expecting to find nothing but blank sheets or indecipherable notes. But there, on a page near the middle, seemingly out of place amidst a few sparse diagrams of joinery techniques, was a small, intricately detailed pencil sketch. It was a miniature wooden boat, no bigger than his thumb, rendered with astonishing precision. Every plank, every tiny rivet, every curve of its hull was meticulously drawn. It was as if a tiny, silent world had been captured on that single sheet of paper. Below the sketch, almost illegible, scrawled in a hurried hand, was a cryptic phrase. The whispers of forgotten stories live in the smallest things. And beneath that, a name and a phone number. Silas Vance, Master Miniaturist. Elias stared at the sketch, then at the name. Silas Vance. He vaguely recalled a quiet, eccentric old professor, renowned for his work with tiny, impossibly detailed art. He'd found him intimidating then, dismissive of his own fleeting interest in the subject. Now, in his despair, the sketch seemed to hum with a strange, almost ethereal energy. It was a tiny detail, overlooked for years, a whisper from a forgotten past. Yet in that moment, it felt louder than all the unpaid bills, louder than the incessant ringing of his phone. A faint spark, a flicker of an idea, ignited within him. Elias had always possessed a knack for working with his hands, a latent talent for precision and detail that had been stifled by the demands of survival. He'd once spent hours as a child building complex Lego structures, later moving on to intricate models, finding a quiet joy in the creation of something beautiful from raw components. This was a hobby he'd abandoned years ago, dismissing it as frivolous, a luxury he couldn't afford. But looking at the miniature boat, a profound, almost primal urge stirred within him. What if this seemingly insignificant passion, this forgotten skill, could be something more? The thought was absurd, almost laughable, given his dire circumstances. How could miniature boats possibly solve a mountain of debt? But the feeling persisted, a quiet insistence that refused to be dismissed. Later that day, with a tremor in his hand and a knot in his stomach, Elias dialed the number written next to Silas Vance's name. It rang several times before a gruff, raspy voice answered. "Vance," the voice grunted. Elias, stumbling over his words, explained how he'd found the old notebook, the sketch, his forgotten interest. There was a long silence on the other end, so long that Elias thought he'd been disconnected. Then Silas spoke, his voice less gruff now, tinged with a faint curiosity. "Come tomorrow. Bring that notebook, and bring patience. You'll need it." Elias arrived at Silas Vance's workshop the next morning, a nondescript building tucked away on a quiet, unassuming street. Inside, it was a world unto itself, filled with tiny tools, magnifying glasses, miniature forests of delicate wood, and the faint, comforting scent of sawdust and bees. Silas Vance, older now, his face a roadmap of fine lines, his eyes sharp and discerning, looked Elias up and down. "So, the boy who drew tiny boats returns," he mused, a faint smile playing on his lips. He was initially demanding, testing Elias's commitment, pushing him to the limits of his patience and precision. He didn't sugarcoat the difficulty of the craft, the endless hours, the minuscule margins for error. But Elias, driven by a newfound, desperate resolve, absorbed every lesson. He learned to work with tools so small they felt like extensions of his fingertips. He learned the subtle art of shaping, sanding, and assembling components barely visible to the naked eye. He spent hours, days, weeks in Silas's workshop, often until the late hours, fueled by cheap coffee and the quiet hum of his burgeoning purpose. Each tiny piece he created was a battle won, a small victory against the tide of his despair. He made mistakes, countless mistakes, splinters of wood, misplaced glue, ruined pieces that had taken hours to construct. Frustration often threatened to overwhelm him. But Silas, in his own gruff way, offered encouragement, teaching him not just the mechanics of the craft, but the philosophy of it, that true mastery came from patience, from embracing imperfection, and from finding beauty in the minute details others overlooked. Elias started with simple miniatures, gradually moving to more complex designs inspired by his own imagination. Miniature scenes from old books, tiny whimsical houses, and eventually, the intricate wooden boats that had sparked it all. He poured his soul into each piece, each tiny creation a testament to his renewed spirit, a silent declaration of his resilience. His work, though small in scale, began to tell large stories. It was Silas Vance who, without Ilias's knowledge, quietly showed some of Ilias's early pieces to a friend who owned a small, independent art gallery. The gallery owner, captivated by the intricate detail and the quiet poetry of Ilias's work, offered him a small corner display. The first few weeks passed without a single sale. Elias felt a familiar wave of disappointment, but he continued to create, driven by the pure joy of the process itself, a joy he hadn't felt in years. Then, one rainy afternoon, a wealthy collector, passing through town, stumbled upon the gallery. Her eye caught Elias's miniature boat, no bigger than her thumb, sitting silently in its small display case. She was mesmerized by its astonishing detail, its almost lifelike presence. She bought it, and then another, and another. Word began to spread. Soon, inquiries started coming in, not just from the local community, but from online art forums, from collectors fascinated by the resurgence of miniature craftsmanship. Ilias's prices, initially modest, began to climb, reflecting the demand for his unique, heartfelt creations. He set up a small online shop, working late into the night, fulfilling orders. Slowly, painstakingly, the tides began to turn. The collection calls became fewer, then ceased altogether. The bills, once an insurmountable mountain, began to shrink, then disappeared. The feeling of suffocation receded, replaced by the profound, exhilarating sensation of breathing freely again. It took over 2 years of relentless work, of dedication to his craft, but the day finally came when Elias Thorne made his last debt payment. It wasn't a grand, dramatic moment, but a quiet, deeply personal victory. He stood in his apartment, which now felt less like a cage and more like a home, and looked at his hands. Hands that had once been raw from physical labor, now calloused from delicate, meticulous work. The transformation was not just financial. It was a profound shift within his very being. Elias, the man who was drowning in debt, had found his rescue not in a grand scheme, but in a tiny, forgotten detail. A sketch in an old notebook, a whisper from a past passion. He had learned that sometimes the greatest transformations begin with the smallest of sparks in the most unexpected of places. And that true freedom comes not just from overcoming external struggles, but from rediscovering the forgotten dreams and passions that lie dormant within us waiting to be awakened. He was no longer just a man paying off debt. He was an artist, a creator, a testament to the quiet power of perseverance and the profound beauty hidden in the smallest things. And in that, he found a peace far more valuable than any sum of money.